Sometimes you just need to see something to trust it. Now, some of you may remember a few years back when my daughter was hospitalized. She went through a series of surgeries, 4 major ones, and the last one was definitely the worst. She had been in the hospital nearly a month by that point in time, the last week of it spent in the ICU on a ventilator. By then, she had lost almost a quarter of her body weight, and I still remember how fragile she looked as they wheeled her away to surgery. It was about the first time I let down my 100%, we're going to be positive about this, totally trusting the doctors, everything's going to be okay stance that I had been clinging to for so long. Now, of course, you know that everything was okay, and the doctor came back in to talk to us afterward while she was in recovery. He said, "Hey, everything looks good. I think we fixed it this time." But though I could hear his words, they somehow didn't count for much. What counted, what made it real that she was okay, was when she got out of that recovery room, when I could hold her hand and stroke her forehead and kiss her cheek. It wasn't real until I could touch her. So I get Thomas in today's passage. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hand," he says, "and put my finger where the nails were, my hand into his side, I will not believe." I've been thinking quite a bit this week about how much importance we humans place upon our embodied self, our physical beings, how they are such an important part of who we are and how we interact with and relate to each other. Maybe more for some than for others. I know some of you out there have been posting that you're huggers and you're having a very hard time right now rerouting how you greet people, how you offer comfort, or how you connect with others during this time of COVID-19. And teachers and students in Iowa took a hit this week, hearing the official word that school will not meet in person for the remainder of the 2019-2020 school year. Teachers are missing their students. Students are missing their teachers. I know some who are working with alternative populations who are really worried about, with the lack of structure and routine and resources, they're really worried if their students will be okay and they can't check in and they can't see them in the same way they always would. There are lots of traditions and goodbyes that aren't happening, from graduating seniors missing out on capstone seasons and competitions and award nights and the alma mater being sung through the halls, to 5th graders not getting to experience their 5th grade walk and the end of the year celebration. There is something in the physical embodiment of these traditions that makes the experience seem more tangible. Sure, graduation is going to happen regardless, but it somehow seems a little less real without that march across the stage, the principal's handshake, and then the hugs and high fives from teachers and friends. Then there is the church. How much of our church community has been dependent upon our gathered togetherness to experience God and to experience ourselves as the body of Christ? We break bread together. We share it with one another. We share coffee and cookies and conversation after church. We baptize with water and touch our heads in blessing. We shake hands, or at least we used to shake hands, and pass the peace. We ordain and set apart for service by a laying on of hands. So much of our church life has been predicated by our occupying the same space together. Maybe we're all feeling a little more sympathy for Thomas this year. What Thomas wants, and even what he really demands, is what all the other disciples have already been given. He wants to know that this thing that has been experienced by everyone else, that it is the same Jesus that they have known before. That is not some sort of different ethereal apparition. It's not some figment of the imagination. It's not a fever dream built on wishes and hopes. That this Jesus, who is certainly in some ways different, for he is able to appear in their midst despite locked doors, that this is still the same Jesus who lived with them and traveled with them, who taught and healed and fed, who was crucified and who died. He wants to see the scars to know that this is the real deal, not something different. He needs to see it, to experience it, in order to trust it. And Jesus comes to him just as he did the other disciples, offering him what he needs to believe and giving him the promise of his presence, despite the fears and despite the doubts and despite death itself, offering a relationship despite all of those things. So here we are, locked in our own rooms, or in my case right now, in my basement. And it can be hard for us to trust God's presence in the midst of all this, and the presence of our community, because all of those familiar ways of being together and experiencing God and growing in faith and worshiping are not available to us right now. And maybe we're growing a little tired, and the adrenaline of the first few weeks of social distancing and self-quarantining is wearing off. And now people are beginning to talk about how this is going to impact not just a few weeks, but months or even years. And we wonder, are these things that we are doing to connect and to be the church, to reach out to others and to God, are these things consistent with the body of Christ we used to know? Is Christ really present in Zoom meetings and YouTube worship? And a hand wave from a safe distance? Maybe this year, this passage from John that we read every year on this second Sunday of Easter, maybe this year reminds us that Jesus enters those locked rooms and breathes peace upon his disciples and reassures them that though things may be different, he is still the same. And that same breath of God is still breathing upon us. We may not know what the days and the weeks and months ahead may hold, but we can know that the Spirit of God is given to us, accompanies us, empowers us. That the Spirit that is received is from the same Jesus who ate with sinners and embraced the outcast, fed the masses, had compassion on the sick, and was crucified for it. The same Jesus who stands in our midst and invites us into the resurrection. The same Jesus who binds us together into a community that spans distance and time, even when we must be apart. We have what we need to get through this day, and the next day, and the next, even as we begin to shape a new reality, a new way of being. So let us take a deep breath in and begin. Perhaps we will be lucky enough to touch resurrection ourselves.